The military tribunal was supposed to be routine, a final ruling on whether Captain Elias Mercer could keep his loyal war dog Ghost. But when Ghost suddenly snarls at an unseen danger, the air turns electric. Moments later, strangers step from the shadows, claiming the dog was never his to begin with. What secret does Ghost hold? Who are these men? And why does Elias feel like he's been fighting the wrong battle all along? Stay until the end for the shocking twist. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this gripping saga. The air in the tribunal chamber was thick, a suffocating blend of authority and finality. It carried the weight of military discipline, the sharpness of rules that refused to bend, and the unspoken truth that no matter how much one fought, some battles were already decided before they began. Captain Elias Mercer sat motionless in his military-issued wheelchair, his fingers gripping the worn leather of the armrests, his breathing slow and measured. The room was sterile, all cold steel and hard edges, a place where emotion held no ground, where the only thing that mattered was protocol, regulation, and the chain of command. He was no stranger to battlefields, no stranger to standing against the odds, but today, here, in this room, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Helplessness. Not for himself, for Ghost. At his side, the black Belgian Malinois sat, posture rigid and disciplined, ears flicking at the smallest movements. Ghost wasn't calm. Elias could feel it in the way the dog's muscles tensed beneath his sleek coat, the way his amber eyes flicked from face to face, assessing, reading, understanding. Ghost was sensing something Elias couldn't yet see. The three-men tribunal sat at the long table before him, their uniforms pressed and pristine, their expressions unreadable. The lead judge, General Markham, studied Elias with that same hardened military gaze Elias had seen in commanders before, the kind that didn't break, didn't waver, didn't care about sentiment. Beside Markham, Colonel Hayes glanced at a thick file resting on the table, his fingers drumming lightly against it, while Major Patterson, the youngest of the three, sat stiff-backed, eyes darting between Ghost and Elias, as though searching for something he didn't understand. Elias exhaled slowly. This wasn't about understanding. It was about ownership. General Markham leaned forward, fingers laced together, voice calm, methodical, final. "Captain Mercer," he said, the title spoken with the politeness of a formality rather than the respect it once held. "The matter at hand is simple. Ghost is a government asset. He was assigned to your unit, and as per protocol, he will now be reassigned to a new deployment." Elias clenched his jaw, his chest tightening. "Not this. Not now." "With all due respect, sir," he said, his voice steady but edged with barely restrained anger. "Ghost is more than an asset. He's more than a weapon, more than a tool to be passed around from handler to handler." Markram's expression didn't change. He waited, silent. Elias felt the weight of the moment, the way the entire room watched as he continued. "I lost my team in that last mission, every single one of them," Elias said, his throat tightening, but he refused to let his voice break. "Ghost and I, we made it out together. He saved me when I should have died. He's not just a military dog. He's my partner." Markham exhaled, slow and measured. "Your sentiment is understandable, Captain." His voice remained neutral, detached, a tone Elias had grown to hate over the years. "But Ghost is a product of the K9 Special Operations Program. He is not yours." Not yours. Elias felt a burn deep in his gut, not just anger. Something else, something sharper. He had spent years in war zones, walking the thin line between life and death, watching men fall, watching the world collapse in chaos, and through it all, there had been one constant, one unwavering presence: Ghost. When the world had gone dark, when the silence had been too loud, when the weight of survivor's guilt had pressed down on his chest, Ghost had been there. When Elias had sat alone in the hospital, staring at the stump of a leg where flesh and bone had once been, Ghost had been there. Elias swallowed hard. Ghost had done more than just save his life. He had kept him alive, and now they wanted to take him away. The room remained stiflingly silent, the only sound the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, Colonel Hayes shifted in his seat, glancing once more at the file before speaking. "Captain," he said, softer than Markham but still firm, still unmoving. "Ghost's reassignment has been confirmed. He will be transferred to a new Special Operations Unit within the next 72 hours. 72 hours. Elias's stomach churned. They were taking his dog, his partner, his family. In 72 hours. A slow, simmering fury began to build in his chest, pressing against his ribs like a storm about to break. "You're making a mistake," Elias said, his voice no longer just a plea. "You don't understand what you're doing." Markham's expression hardened. "This is not up for debate." Elias felt his fingers dig into the wheelchair's armrests, his breath shallow, tight. Ghost, as if sensing his handler's distress, pressed his nose against Elias's leg. A silent reassurance. The room blurred slightly, the walls closing in, the faces in front of him merging with memories of loss, of war, of pain. No, he wouldn't let this happen. His voice was steel when he spoke next. "I will fight this." Markham's gaze didn't waver. "You won't win." Elias didn't blink. "Watch me." The room went still. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Markham sighed, slow and heavy, like a man who had already made up his mind. He reached for the gavel. "This tribunal rules in favor of—" Then it happened. Ghost's head snapped up. His entire body stiffened, muscles coiling like a loaded spring, ears standing rigid and alert. Then, a sound rumbled from deep in his throat, a sound Elias hadn't heard since the battlefield, a growl, low, primal, warning. It sent a ripple through the room, a silent, gut-deep unease that no one could quite place, but everyone felt. Elias's pulse spiked. Ghost never growled without reason, and when he did, it meant one thing: danger. The tribunal members stiffened, glancing at one another. The bailiffs at the door subtly shifted, hands resting on their holsters. Markham's brow furrowed. "What's wrong with the dog?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ghost's amber eyes locked onto something invisible, his muscles bunching like a predator sensing the unseen. Then, he moved. Before Elias could react, Ghost lunged forward, ripping the leash from his grasp. His bark split the silence like a gunshot, the force of it sending a shockwave of tension through the chamber. Something was wrong, and Ghost had just seen it before anyone else. Elias felt it now. The shift in the air, the crackle of something unseen yet present. Then, from the hallway beyond the chamber, a sound. A metallic clang, distant but distinct. And in that moment, Elias knew with absolute certainty, this battle was no longer about Ghost's reassignment. Something else was coming, and it had just begun. A metallic clang echoed from beyond the tribunal doors. The sound was faint, distant, but in a military base where everything was controlled, routine, and precise, it was wrong. A sound like that shouldn't happen here. Elias knew it instantly, and so did Ghost. The dog's body stiffened, his black fur rising slightly along his back. His ears pinned forward, eyes locked on the tribunal's side entrance. And then, a growl. Deep, primal, a warning. It sent an icy ripple through the tribunal chamber. Elias felt it like a shock to his spine. That sound, he knew it. This wasn't just barking. This wasn't the frustration of a dog sensing an argument in the air. This was the sound Ghost made when there was danger nearby. Real danger. A judge cleared his throat. The murmur of tribunal members fell into silence as the sound of Ghost's guttural growl spread through the room, a sound so out of place that it immediately put everyone on edge. General Markham turned sharply in his chair. "Control your animal, Captain." But Elias didn't move. He didn't dare. Instead, his focus locked on Ghost, the way the dog hadn't moved from his low, tense stance, the way his growl hadn't moved from his low, tense stance, the way his growl hadn't moved from his low, tense stance. And then, Ghost lunged. It happened in a heartbeat. The leash snapped free from Elias's grip, tearing against his palm as Ghost charged the side door. His claws scraped against the polished floor, his body a black streak of muscle and instinct, barreling toward the door with a fury Elias had only ever seen in war zones. The tribunal chamber erupted into chaos. What the hell? Bailiffs, stand down. Someone grab that dog. Chairs scraped back, boots slammed against the floor, hands gripped weapons. But Elias's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Nobody move. Ghost skidded to a halt just feet from the door, barking with a ferocity that echoed through the chamber, his entire body coiled, his tail stiff like a spear, his stance one of pure aggression. Elias's chest tightened like a vice. Ghost never reacted like this. Not in secure areas, not unless... Elias turned to General Markham, voice low and firm. Get your men away from that door. The air shifted, thick with tension. Markham's eyes narrowed, flicking between Elias and the growling dog. Explain. Elias' voice was like steel. He's trained for this. Ghost doesn't react unless he senses a threat, and right now, he thinks something's on the other side of that door. The entire tribunal went silent. The bailiffs hesitated, hands hovering near their weapons, looking to Markham for orders. The general's jaw clenched, but Elias could see it, that flicker of uncertainty. Then, the door creaked open on its own. The sound was slow, unnatural, deliberate. A cold breath of air slipped into the chamber, and suddenly the tension in the room snapped into something else entirely. Fear. Elias's grip tightened on his wheelchair armrests. Because he knew. He knew. Something was there. Something was waiting, and Ghost had just sensed it before anyone else. The open door yawned into darkness, the hallway beyond eerily silent. Not dimly lit, not shadowed, pitch black. A hallway that should have been illuminated by military-grade LED lights now sat in a void of unnatural darkness. And Elias's gut twisted painfully. This wasn't right. Something was blocking the light. Something was distorting reality itself. A few feet ahead, Ghost crouched low, his barks relentless, the sound ricocheting through the tribunal chamber like warning sirens. The bailiffs stiffened, their hands hovering over their holsters. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, moved toward the door, his jaw tight. Probably just a... Then they heard it. A footstep. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Elias's breath hitched, because whoever was in that hallway wasn't rushing. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be heard. A judge let out a sharp breath, standing so quickly that his chair toppled backward. The bailiffs moved instantly, stepping toward the door, their weapons drawn now, no hesitation. But Elias shouted first. Back up! Now! The nearest bailiff hesitated. But Ghost didn't. The dog lunged forward, barking so hard that his entire body vibrated with the effort. The sound of his snarls ripped through the chamber, his teeth bared, hackles raised. Something was coming. And then, a second footstep, closer. Elias's entire body locked up. The bailiff at the door swallowed hard, shining a flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught nothing. Nothing but an endless hallway that should have been fully illuminated. Sir, the bailiff started, but then something moved. A shadow, not a person, not a shape, just a shadow. And suddenly, Elias knew, he knew with an unshakable certainty, they were not alone in this room, and neither was Ghost. Markham was on his feet now, his face no longer composed, no longer stoic. Who's there? No answer, not immediately. But then, something stepped forward. A man, or at least something that looked like one. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing military fatigues, but there were no patches, no name, no insignia, just blank, unmarked fabric. And behind him, two more men stepped into the light, all dressed the same, all expressionless, all watching. Elias felt his blood turn to ice. His military training screamed at him. He had seen elite units, black ops teams, deep cover agents, but not like this. There was something off about them, something calculated, mechanical, like they had already anticipated every move before it even happened. The lead man finally spoke, his voice smooth, composed, too calm. "We are here for the dog." The tribunal chamber hung in absolute silence. The air was thick with tension, pressing against the walls, pressing into Elias's lungs like a weight that refused to lift. No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound in the entire room was the low, primal growl that rumbled from deep within Ghost's chest. The dog's body was coiled, stiff and rigid. His amber eyes locked onto the men who had just stepped through the open doorway. Elias felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears, a slow, rhythmic drumbeat of something primal, something that whispered to him that he had faced death before, but never like this. The man who stood before them was military, but not military. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in fatigues that should have been familiar, but something about him was off. There were no insignias, no patches, no rank, just an empty uniform, blank and unreadable, like a soldier who had been stripped of his identity. And behind him 2 more men stepped forward, mirroring his stance, their movements unnervingly synchronized, as if they weren't 3 individuals but one single entity moving in unison. Elias had seen elite units before. He had worked alongside classified teams, black ops soldiers who moved like ghosts in the dark, who were trained to kill with precision. But this wasn't that. This was something else, something colder, something inhuman. Then the lead figure spoke. His voice was smooth, unsettlingly calm, almost hollow. "We are here for the dog." The words sent a chill through the chamber. General Markham took a measured step forward, squaring his shoulders. His face, once lined with irritation over the tribunal hearing, had hardened into something else. Authority, experience. But even he wasn't prepared for this. "Identify yourselves." Markham's voice was like steel, sharp and unwavering. "You are on a secured military base. You do not have authorization to be here." The man didn't blink, didn't react. He only turned his gaze, slowly, deliberately, toward Elias. Elias's hands tightened into fists on the wheelchair armrests, his pulse hammering in his throat. Ghost let out a sharp bark, the sound breaking through the heavy silence like a gunshot. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he took a single step forward. Ghost's snarl deepened, his lips pulling back to reveal sharp, white teeth. Elias knew that stance. That wasn't just aggression. That was pure instinct. Ghost wasn't just defending him. Ghost was warning him. The stranger's lips curled into something that might have been a smirk, if not for the absence of warmth in his expression. And then he spoke again, this time directly to Elias. "You were never meant to keep him." Elias's blood ran cold. The words landed like a knife to the gut, twisting deep, digging into something he didn't understand but felt, instinctively, was the truth. Something was wrong. Horribly wrong. Elias forced himself to speak, but his voice was rough, jagged. "Who the hell are you?" The man's smirk remained, but his eyes, they were unreadable, void of emotion. "Ghost isn't just a dog." Elias felt the air leave his lungs. He had spent years with Ghost, had fought with him, bled with him, survived with him. And yet, those 6 words, "Ghost isn't just a dog," they changed everything. They shattered something in his understanding of the world. Markham took another step forward, his patience thinning. "Enough of this bullshit. Identify yourselves or I will have my men." The 2 men behind the lead figure moved instantly. Their hands shifted to their sides, and the air in the tribunal chamber exploded into chaos. The bailiffs reacted on instinct, their weapons drawn in an instant. The tribunal members scrambled back, chairs toppling over, voices rising in panic. But Elias wasn't watching them. He was watching Ghost. The moment the 2 men reached for their weapons, Ghost lunged. A blur of black fur and raw muscle, he exploded forward like a missile, his powerful legs propelling him toward the lead figure. Elias's heart clenched. Because this wasn't just an attack. This was Ghost reacting to something deeper, something unseen, something only he could feel, something Elias couldn't understand. The lead figure didn't react, didn't move, didn't even flinch. Until he raised his hand, not toward Ghost, not toward the bailiffs, toward Elias. And the moment his fingers curled slightly, something happened. Something that made Elias's stomach drop. Ghost stopped. Mid-lunge, mid-air. Frozen, suspended. For one horrific second, it was as if Ghost's body was caught in an invisible grip. His powerful limbs seizing up, his bark cutting off like something had reached into his throat and stolen his voice. Elias's breath shattered. His heart slammed against his ribs. His fingers digging into the wheelchair armrest so hard he felt his nails tear into the leather. What? What the hell is happening? Ghost hit the ground hard, his body convulsing, his breath ragged, his eyes wide, and filled with something Elias had never seen in them before. Terror. Real, primal terror. Ghost. Elias' voice cracked. He tried to move, to reach for him. But Ghost didn't move. Didn't respond. The lead figure lowered his hand. And then, for the first time, his smirk widened. You really thought he was yours? Elias's vision blurred with rage. He barely registered the tribunal members shouting for security, the bailiff screaming at the intruders to stand down. All he saw was Ghost, twitching on the floor, paralyzed by something Elias couldn't fight, something he didn't understand. Then, gunfire erupted. A shot rang out. The bailiffs opened fire. The tribunal chamber descended into hell. The bullets never hit their targets, because before the first shot could even reach them, the three men were gone. Vanished, like shadows evaporating in light. The bullets tore through empty space, punching into the tribunal walls, shattering glass. A judge screamed. Elias's breath sawed through his chest. Then, Ghost jerked violently, sucking in a sharp, ragged breath. And Elias moved. His wheelchair shot forward, skidding across the floor as he reached for Ghost. Gripping the dog's fur, feeling the tremors racking his body, Markham was shouting orders, but Elias wasn't listening. Ghost's eyes locked onto him, wild and lost, and Elias knew. They had to get out. Now. Before whatever had just happened to Ghost happened again. The last thing Elias heard before the doors slammed shut behind them was the lead figure's voice, echoing in his head like a whisper of something much, much bigger. Run, Captain. But you can't outrun the truth. The tribunal doors slammed shut behind them, the heavy metal reverberating through the hallway like a judge's gavel, sealing the fate of a case no one fully understood. Elias's breath came in short, sharp bursts, his heart a relentless drumbeat against his ribs. He could still hear the voice of the lead figure whispering in his mind. Run, Captain, but you can't outrun the truth. His hands gripped Ghost's fur tightly, fingers digging into the coarse black coat as he felt the tremors still racking the dog's powerful body. Ghost had never been like this before. Never hesitated, never wavered, and now he was panting heavily, eyes wide, a haunted look settling in where there had once been unshakable focus. Elias felt a foreign emotion rise up in his chest, something he hadn't felt since his last mission overseas. Fear? Not for himself. For Ghost, Markham and the other tribunal members had scattered like rats from a sinking ship. The gunfire, the sudden disappearance of those men, the eerie paralysis that had overtaken Ghost, none of it made sense. The bailiffs who had fired the shot stood frozen, their weapons still gripped in white-knuckled hands. Their eyes darted wildly around the chamber, looking for something that wasn't there anymore. Elias forced his chair forward, wheeling toward Markham, who was barking orders into his radio. Lock the base down. No one in, no one out. I want every goddamn security camera checked. Find out who those men were. Elias didn't waste breath telling him it was pointless. There would be nothing on the cameras. Somehow he knew. Ghost let out a low whimper, his head jerking toward the tribunal doors, his nose twitching like he was still tracking something no one else could see. Elias swallowed hard. Then he turned to Markham. "You saw what happened in there. You felt it." His voice was low, strained. "Tell me you don't think this was just some rogue unit trying to steal a dog." Markham turned, his hard eyes locking onto Elias's, but his silence was the answer Elias needed. Markham had felt it too. He had seen what Ghost saw, but neither of them could explain it, and that was the part that scared Elias the most. Ghost gave a sudden, sharp bark, his body snapping upright, muscles tensed to spring. Elias twisted to follow his line of sight, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the empty hallway. And yet, something was wrong. The air felt heavy, dense, as if the walls were pressing inward, suffocating the space between them. Then, the lights flickered. Just once. A moment of brief, crackling darkness. Then they steadied. Markham's hand went to his gun, his fingers tight on the grip. The bailiffs were already drawing their weapons again, looking around like ghosts had entered the room. Elias's stomach twisted. Something was coming. And Ghost knew it first. Again? Just like before? Elias grabbed Markham's arm, voice low, urgent. "We need to leave. Now." Markham didn't hesitate. He turned to the guards. "Escort Captain Mercer and the dog to a secured vehicle. Take them to the underground bunker." The bailiffs moved immediately, forming a protective circle around Elias and Ghost as they hurried toward the security elevator at the end of the hallway. Elias didn't need to ask where they were going. The bunker. It was where high-level personnel went during a threat to national security. And that fact alone chilled Elias to his core. Because if Markham was treating this like a national threat, then what the hell had just happened in that tribunal room? The elevator lurched downward, the only sound inside the cramped space, the low, rhythmic beeping of the security panel. Elias exhaled, the air feeling too thin, too thick all at once. Ghost sat at his side, his breath still uneven, but the tremors in his body were fading. Slowly. The bailiffs flanked them, tense, silent. Markham stood at the control panel, his eyes locked on the small blinking light that indicated their descent into the bunker. Elias frowned and cleared his throat. Tom nodded. The light turned red. Elias frowned. Markham swore. The elevator slowed, then stopped. The small overhead lights flickered. And then, the world went black. Total, suffocating blackness. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. Then, a whisper, not a voice, not something human. A sound so faint, so unnatural, it made Elias's skin crawl. Then, a single electronic buzz, and the lights snapped back on. The elevator doors opened, and standing in the underground bunker was the lead figure from the tribunal chamber. Elias's breath stopped. Markham reached for his gun. Too late. The man was already moving. He stepped forward, his blank, unreadable expression never changing as he stared directly at Elias. Ghost snapped into action, launching forward with all the force of an unleashed missile, but the man raised his hand. And again. Ghost stopped. Not by choice, not because Elias called him back, because something unseen, had frozen him in place. Ghost let out a low, painful whimper, his body shaking violently. And then, the man finally spoke. "You think you know what he is, Captain, but you don't." Elias's stomach dropped. The man tilted his head, his voice like something out of a nightmare. "You were never meant to bond with him." Markham fired his gun. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. And then the bullet stopped mid-air. It didn't hit the man. It didn't ricochet. It hung there, suspended, frozen, as if time itself had refused to let it land. Elias's breath came in short, panicked bursts. The world was tilting, shifting, warping around him in ways that didn't make sense. Then the bullet turned, slowly, deliberately, and fired back. Markham barely dodged in time, the bullet whizzing past his head, embedding into the wall behind him. Elias couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man's eyes locked onto his, and then he smiled. A small, knowing, terrifying smile. "We don't need you, Captain," he said, voice calm, final. Then his gaze flicked to Ghost. "But we do need him." Elias's pulse roared in his ears. Ghost let out another low whimper, his body still caught in whatever unseen force held him in place. The man took another step forward, and Elias knew. He knew with every fiber of his being. They were about to take Ghost. And this time, there would be no tribunal, no paperwork, no bureaucracy. Just vanishing into the dark, never to be seen again. Elias's breath shook as he whispered the only thing that came to mind. "Over my dead body." The man's smile widened. "We can arrange that." The air felt thick, pressing down on Elias's chest like a weight he couldn't shake. His breath came fast and sharp, but his grip on his wheelchair remained firm, his body wound tight with adrenaline. Ghost was still frozen, caught in that eerie, unnatural paralysis. His body shook violently, muscles twitching like he was fighting against an invisible force. And standing before them, the lead figure, his blank fatigues void of insignias, of identity, of anything human. "We don't need you, Captain." The words hung in the air, thick, heavy. Elias's fingers curled into fists, but it wasn't fear burning in his chest now. It was rage. "You think you can just take him?" Elias's voice was sharp, edged with defiance. "Like hell you will." The man tilted his head slightly, almost like he was amused. "You don't understand, Captain." His voice was calm, smooth, calculated. "Ghost was never yours to begin with." Elias's stomach tightened. A slow, creeping unease slithered through his veins. Ghost let out a low whimper, his amber eyes locked onto Elias, silently begging him to do something. Elias's pulse pounded. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to run, to do something. But he couldn't move, couldn't act, because nothing made sense. Then, the man took another step forward. And something in Elias snapped. His training took over. With one swift motion, Elias lunged forward, grabbing the sidearm strapped to his wheelchair. The gun was up in an instant, his hands steady, his aim locked onto the man's forehead. "Let him go." The words left no room for argument. The bailiffs beside him hesitated, hands on their own weapons, but they were watching Elias now. Waiting. Markham's jaw clenched, his eyes darting from Elias to the frozen bullet still embedded in the wall. Nothing about this was normal. Nothing about this was right. The man paused, his gaze flicking down to the gun in Elias's hands, and then he laughed. A short, cold chuckle, like he had heard a joke no one else understood. Elias's grip tightened on the trigger. "I said, let him go." The stranger smiled. Then he raised his hand, and Elias's gun tore itself from his grip, ripped away by a force he couldn't see. The weapon spun mid-air, twisting unnaturally before it clattered to the ground at the man's feet. Elias's breath hitched. The air crackled, like static before a lightning strike. And then the man spoke. "Ghost isn't just a dog." The words cut through the tension, and for the first time, Elias felt true, absolute dread. Ghost's body seized violently, his whimpers turning into something low, broken, unnatural. Elias lurched forward, grabbing the dog's fur. "I'm here, buddy. I've got you." Ghost's body jerked, his eyes rolling back for a moment, his breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. And then, something changed. Ghost went still. The violent tremor stopped. For a split second, Elias thought it was over. But then, Ghost's eyes snapped open, and Elias felt his blood turn to ice. Because Ghost's eyes weren't amber anymore. They were black, pitch black, like a void, like something had taken hold of him. Elias's hands shook, his chest tightening. The dog rose slowly, his movements almost unnatural, rigid. Elias could feel his pulse thundering in his throat. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And then, Ghost turned his head toward the stranger and sat, perfectly still. Elias's stomach dropped. Ghost wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at them, like he was waiting for a command. Elias felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest, not from an injury, but from something deeper, something raw, because Ghost had never looked at anyone else like that before. Never. The stranger smiled. "Now do you see?" Elias's breath came in short bursts. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Ghost was his partner, his family. No one could just take that away. No one. Markham's voice was low, barely above a whisper. "What the hell have you done to him?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he took one more step forward, and Ghost followed. Elias's breath hitched. Ghost didn't hesitate, didn't resist. He just followed. Elias's chest ached, like something inside him was breaking. "Ghost." His voice cracked. The dog paused, and for a brief fleeting moment Ghost's ears twitched, just barely, like he had heard him, like there was still a part of him left inside. Elias clenched his jaw. He wasn't losing him. Not like this. Not ever. His hand shook with anger, with desperation, as he grabbed the gun from the ground. He didn't aim at the stranger. He aimed at the lights above, and fired. The bulbs exploded, sparks raining down as darkness consumed the room. The moment the shadows hit, Elias moved. He lunged forward, grabbing Ghost's harness, pulling with everything he had. For a second, nothing happened. Then, Ghost whimpered. A sound so faint, so broken, that it shattered something inside Elias's chest. And then, Ghost moved. Not much, just a single sharp step backward, but it was enough. Elias grabbed him, wrapping his arms around the dog. The stranger's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and furious. "That won't change anything." Elias didn't care. He turned, gritted his teeth against the pain of his injuries, and ran. Ghost stumbled beside him, his legs still weak, but he was moving, and that was all that mattered. Behind them, the stranger's voice rose, cold and final. "You can run, Captain, but you can't stop what's coming." Elias didn't turn back. He didn't slow down. Because whatever was coming, he would fight it, with everything he had. Because Ghost wasn't just a dog. He was his, and no one was taking him away. Elias gritted his teeth, ignoring the burning in his muscles as he pushed his wheelchair forward, his hands gripping the wheels with force. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to stop, but he couldn't, because Ghost was running beside him now, and that meant he was still in this fight. The hallway ahead was dimly lit, stretching forward like a tunnel with no end. The emergency lights flickered weakly, barely enough to illuminate the path, casting long, shifting shadows against the walls. The bunker was designed to withstand any external attack, but whatever was happening now wasn't coming from outside. It was inside. And it was hunting them. Ghost let out a low whimper, his body still tense, still recovering from whatever had paralyzed him moments ago. Elias reached down, running a hand over the dog's back as they moved. "You with me, buddy?" His voice was tight, urgent, desperate. Ghost's ears flicked slightly, but there was hesitation in his movements, as if something inside him was still pulling in another direction. Elias's gut twisted painfully. Whatever they had done to him, it wasn't over, and Elias was running out of time to fix it. Behind them, the corridor remained silent, But Elias knew they weren't alone. The stranger's words still echoed in his mind, curling around his thoughts like smoke. "You can run, Captain, but you can't stop what's coming." His fingers tightened into fists, pushing the thought away. No, they would stop it. Or die trying. Markham was already ahead, moving with the remaining bailiffs, his face set in a grim, determined mask. "Where the hell are we going?" Elias demanded as they neared an armored door at the end of the hallway. Markham didn't slow down. "Surface transport." He slapped the security panel. The door beeped once, then slid open with a heavy metallic hiss. The underground corridor beyond was narrower, darker, leading to an emergency tunnel designed to evacuate high-priority personnel. Elias hated what that meant. Markham was planning to abandon the base, which meant he thought this was already lost. Elias turned to him, voice sharper now, angrier. "You're running." Markham's jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Elias let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's the point, isn't it? We don't know, but you're ready to give up." Markham's glare hardened. "If you have a better idea, Captain, I'd love to hear it." Elias opened his mouth. Then Ghost stopped moving. Dead still. A breath later, his head snapped toward the ceiling, ears pinned back. "And then," he growled. The kind of growl Elias had heard only twice before in his life. Once before an enemy ambush, and once right before an explosion nearly killed them both. Elias felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Something was coming. Markham saw it too. He grabbed his radio. "We need air support now." No answer. Just static. Markham cursed, turning to the bailiffs. "Get them to the trucks. Now." The guards moved instantly, ushering Elias and Ghost forward. But Elias didn't want to go. Something in his gut screamed not to move forward. Not yet. Then, the lights flickered again. And this time, they didn't come back on. The emergency tunnel plunged into total blackness. The only sound was their breathing, their footsteps, the low, dangerous growl rumbling from Ghost's chest. Then, a noise. Soft, but too distinct to be ignored. A whisper. Not from ahead, not from behind, but from everywhere. Elias's breath caught. Then, the gunfire started. It came from the darkness itself, sudden, brutal, precise. Bullets tore through the corridor, slamming into walls, ricocheting off steel beams. The sound deafened the narrow space. Elias's instincts kicked in. "Get down!" The bailiffs moved, returning fire blindly into the blackness. Markham shouted orders, but there was no target, no enemy in sight, only shadows, only darkness. And then, the first guard dropped, a sharp, brutal gasp, then silence. Elias twisted, trying to see, but it was too dark. He couldn't see. He couldn't. Then Ghost lunged forward, snapping at something unseen. A scream. Then another body hit the ground. Elias's pulse thundered. What the hell was happening? Markham grabbed Elias's shoulder, voice raw, urgent. "Move, now." Elias didn't argue. Because he could feel it now. The air was charged, electric, like the moment before a storm. Something was in here with them, and it wasn't human. Ghost snarled, snapping at the air, his body a blur of movement, his instincts taking over. Markham grabbed the last remaining guard and pushed forward. "There's a transport waiting, we can still—" "Or is it the—" The ceiling collapsed. A sound like thunder and stone crashing together, metal beams snapping like twigs. Elias's ears rang violently, his vision spinning as debris rained down. And in the chaos, in the dust, in the destruction, the whisper returned. Right beside him. Low, cold, final. And came face to face with the man from the tribunal chamber. But it wasn't just him now. He wasn't alone. Behind him, shapes moved in the darkness, figures taller than men, eyes glowing faintly, their forms shifting like they weren't bound to this reality. Elias's breath hitched, his body froze, and for the first time, he realized he was no longer fighting men. He was fighting something else, something not of this world. Luce snapped out of his trance, lunging with all his might, but the shadows moved first. The hands, too many hands, grabbed Ghost mid-leap, pulling him back, dragging him toward the blackness. Elias screamed, "No!" He reached, grabbed Ghost's harness, pulled with everything he had. The shadows pulled harder. Markham fired wildly, the muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness for brief moments. But there was no enemy to hit, only shadows. Only whispers. Only Ghost. Being taken away. Elias's grip slipped. And then, Ghost was gone, swallowed whole by the darkness, vanishing like he had never been there at all. Elias felt something inside him shatter. The world blurred. His lungs burned, but he couldn't breathe. Ghost, his best friend, his only family. Gone. And then, the whisper came again, soft and taunting. "Now, we begin." Elias's body collapsed to the floor, his mind spiraling into darkness. And the last thing he heard was Ghost's final, desperate whimper, before everything went black. The darkness swallowed everything. Elias hit the cold floor hard, his breath knocked from his lungs as the weight of reality crashed down on him. His body screamed in protest, his muscles tensed with a raw, pulsing agony that spread from his spine to his fingertips. But none of it mattered, 'cause Ghost was gone. He could still hear the final, desperate whimper, echoing in his mind like a cruel, haunting melody. Gone. Taken. By something that wasn't human. Elias gritted his teeth, rage boiling through his veins like wildfire, chasing away the suffocating despair. No. He wasn't losing Ghost. Not like this. Not to them. The flickering emergency lights overhead struggled to stay alive, bathing the corridor in erratic flashes of red and white. Shadows danced on the walls, stretching and shifting unnaturally, as if the darkness itself was moving. Markham was on his feet, his sidearm raised, his breathing sharp and uneven. The last remaining bailiff was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his expression locked in a stunned, silent terror. And in front of them, the tribunal intruders were still there. The lead figure, the man with no insignia, no identity, stood in the middle of the corridor, his hands calmly clasped behind his back, his gaze locked onto Elias with something almost like pity. Elias's chest heaved. "Where is he?" His voice was raw, hoarse, shaking with fury. The man's lips curled slightly. "Right where he was always meant to be." Elias lunged forward, but the instant he did, the lights died completely. The corridor was plunged into pure, unnatural blackness. Then they came. The air shifted, thickened, like something unseen had entered the space. Elias couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Then, a whisper in his ear. Cold. Wrong. "This isn't your fight, Captain." Elias jerked back, swinging blindly, but his fist hit nothing but air. Then, from the void, hands, too many hands, grabbing, clawing, reaching out from the darkness. Markham shouted something, but it was drowned out by the sudden, deafening roar of wind, a violent, unnatural gust that surged through the corridor, slamming into Elias's chest and knocking him backward. His chair tipped dangerously, skidding against the floor. He barely managed to keep from flipping over completely. Then the screaming began. Not human, not animal, something in between. The shadows moved like liquid, shifting, reforming, crawling across the floor and walls, taking shape. And suddenly, they weren't just shadows anymore. They had form, bodies. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Tall, towering figures rose from the blackness, their limbs too long, their heads tilting at impossible angles, their eyes glowing, faint, blue, flickering like dying stars. And there were so many of them. Elias had faced death before, but nothing like this. Nothing like the way they moved, shifting without sound, without breath, without life. Markham fired first. The gunshots snapped through the air, the muzzle flashes bursting in short, blinding bursts of light. But the bullets never landed, because the figures weren't solid. They moved through the bullets like mist, twisting, reforming, growing closer. The last bailiff screamed. And then he was gone. Pulled into the blackness. Vanished. Markham turned sharply, his face twisted in fury. "Move! Now!" Elias didn't need to be told twice. He pushed forward, his wheels screeching against the floor, but the corridor was narrowing, the space around them closing in, the walls stretching, twisting, warping. The base was no longer the same. Reality itself was shifting, and at the center of it was Ghost Dagon, being pulled into whatever this was. Elias wasn't going to let it happen. His pulse pounded, his mind raced. There had to be a way out. There was always a way out. Then he saw it, a door, marked with bright red letters, Imary, restricted access. A plan formed instantly. "Markham, cover me!" Markham didn't question it. He fired another round, stepping in front of Elias, his stance firm, his grip steady. Elias reached for his badge, swiping it against the panel. The lock clicked, the door slammed open. He spun his chair inside, grabbing the first weapon he saw. A shotgun, fully loaded. He turned back to Markham, tossed him an assault rifle. Then, for the first time, he saw fear in Markham's eyes. But it wasn't fear of dying. It was fear of not knowing what they were fighting. Elias clenched his jaw. Then he cocked the shotgun. "Let's find out." They pushed forward, through the twisting hallways, the air growing colder, heavier. The world around them was breaking apart, warping. But one thing remained clear. Ghost was calling to him, not with sound, not with movement. But Elias could feel it. Something inside him aching with every inch of distance between them. And then they found him, or what was left of him. Ghost was suspended in the air, his body caught in the tendrils of the blackness, his eyes locked open, unseeing. Markham cursed under his breath. Elias felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just an attack. This was a taking, a claiming. "Ghost!" His voice was desperate, raw, broken. The figures turned slowly, their glowing eyes blinking in unison. And then the lead figure spoke. The one from the tribunal, the one who had started it all. He stepped forward, calm, unhurried, his voice like a whisper of wind through an open grave. "You still don't see it, do ya?" Elias raised the shotgun, his arm steady. "Tell me what you did to him." The man smiled. And then he pointed, not at Elias, not at Markham, at Ghost. "He's not your partner, Captain." Elias's breath shook, the man's voice lowered. "Huh. He was never yours. He was ours. From the beginning." Elias felt his world crack. "No." His voice was barely a whisper, but the man just nodded. "And now," his eyes darkened, "we're taking him back." Then the shadows lunged forward. The air shook. Elias fired. Shot after shot, round after round, but nothing landed. Ghost's body convulsed violently, his whimpers turning into something else, something wrong. And then Elias did the only thing he could think of. He threw the gun aside, and he ran. Straight into the darkness. Straight toward Ghost. Straight into whatever the hell was waiting for him. Because if they were taking Ghost, they were taking him too. Elias didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, shoving through the thick, pulsing blackness that wrapped around Ghost like living chains. His lungs burned, his arms screamed in protest, but he didn't stop. Because Ghost was slipping away. The figures in the darkness didn't stop him. They didn't move to block his path. They simply watched. Like they knew something he didn't. Like they had already won. Elias didn't care. He reached Ghost, gripping the harness with both hands, pulling with everything he had. The shadows fought back. The tendrils tightened, twisting around Ghost's legs, his torso, his throat. The dog let out a choked, broken whimper, his amber eyes still dark and distant. Elias's rage erupted. Let him go. The figures didn't respond. The lead figure, the man from the tribunal, the one with no name, no insignia, no humanity, stepped forward. His voice was calm, detached. You don't understand what he is. Elias's grip on Ghost tightened. I don't give a damn. The man tilted his head like he was disappointed. You should, because this was inevitable. Elias's stomach twisted. The words rang in his head, echoing, splintering something deep inside him. Inevitable. Like Ghost had never been his. Like this had always been the plan. The lead figure lifted a hand, and Ghost's body jerked violently. His eyes snapped open, and for the first time, Elias saw the change. The amber was gone. Only darkness remained. Not like his pupils had dilated. Not like his eyes had been clouded by pain. This was something else. Something not natural. Ghost's body tensed, his muscles coiling, his breathing ragged and uneven. And then he turned toward Elias, not as a partner, not as his dog, but as something else entirely. Elias's breath hitched. No. Ghost's lips curled back, his teeth bared. His growl was low, primal, unnatural. And in that moment, Elias realized the truth. They hadn't been trying to take Ghost. They had been trying to wake something inside him. And now, they had succeeded. The lead figure's voice was a whisper of victory. He's ours now. Elias's world shattered. Ghost, his partner, his family, his best friend, was gone. And in his place was something else. Something they had created. Something Elias didn't know how to fight, but he had to, because there was still a chance. A chance to bring him back. To break whatever the hell they had done. To remind Ghost of who he was. Elias took a slow breath, his hands shaking as he lowered himself closer to Ghost. His voice was steady but filled with pain. Hey, buddy, you still in there? Ghost's growl deepened. The shadows around them tightened. The figures closed in. Markham's voice was distant now, shouting, but unimportant. Because this was between Elias and Ghost. One last fight. One last chance. Elias lifted a hand, reaching for Ghost's face. The dog snapped his jaws, barely missing Elias's fingers. Elias didn't pull away. He just kept talking. I know you're in there, Ghost. I know it. The blackness twisted, coiled. The lead figure smiled. He doesn't belong to you anymore, Captain. Let him go. Elias's fingers clenched into Ghost's fur. Not happening. The lead figure's eyes darkened. Then you will die here. Elias didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Didn't care. Because he wasn't leaving without Ghost. And if that meant going down swinging, then so be it. He tightened his grip, pulling Ghost closer. And then he did the only thing that made sense. He closed his eyes and whispered the words that had saved them 1,000 times before. Words Ghost had always understood. Words that had been the difference between life and death, between giving up and fighting back. Ghost Healy. The darkness shuddered. The figures froze. Ghost's body stiffened, and for the first time he hesitated. Elias saw it. The flicker. The war. the battle happening inside his mind. They had taken him, twisted him, controlled him, but there was still a part of him left, and Elias was going to drag him back from the abyss, even if it killed him. "Kill," Ghost's growl faltered. Elias's chest ached. "Come on, buddy. I need you." A whimper. Soft. Barely there. But enough. The figures in the dark moved instantly, their presence shifting, warping. They could feel it. Their hold was breaking. The lead figure's face twisted, his expression finally showing something other than calm control. Panic. Elias pulled Ghost closer, his fingers gripping him like a lifeline. "I'm right here. You're with me, not them." Ghost's head twitched. His breath hitched. Then, his eyes flickered. For the briefest second, the amber returned. And that was all Elias needed. He acted instantly, shoving backward, dragging Ghost with him. The figures lunged, the darkness reaching out. Markham fired every last round he had. The room exploded in fire and sound, the shadows recoiling, twisting in agony. Elias used the distraction. One final push, and then they broke free. Ghost collapsed against him, his body weak, shaking. But his eyes, they were his again. Elias's chest ached with relief. But the fight wasn't over, because the lead figure was still standing. The darkness around him twisting violently, recoiling, lashing out. Elias stared him down, his breath ragged, his pulse hammering. The man's voice was soft now, cold. "You have no idea what you've just done." Elias lifted his gun. "I know exactly what I've done." He pulled the trigger. And this time the bullet landed. The figure lurched back, the darkness around him shrieking. And then he was gone. The corridor fell silent. Elias sagged, gripping Ghost tightly. Markham exhaled sharply. The world around them was still, quiet. For now. Ghost let out a soft sigh, leaning against Elias's leg. And Elias knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not even close. But for now, Ghost was his again, and that was all that mattered. Elias Mercer has been through hell and back, and yet the fight isn't over. He saved Ghost once, but at what cost? The enemy is still out there. The truth is still buried deep beneath layers of deception, hidden in files that were never meant to see the light of day. And now Elias is standing at a crossroads. Does he go on the run, protecting Ghost at all costs, no matter who or what comes after them? Does he hunt down the ones responsible, refusing to let them take another innocent life? Or does he finally uncover the truth about Ghost's origins, even if it means facing something he's not ready for? This is where you come in. Elias and Ghost have fought their way through betrayal, impossible odds, and enemies that should not exist. But what happens next is up to you. Should Elias take the offensive, turning the fight back on those who created this nightmare? Should he seek out allies, others who have suffered at the hands of the same organization? Or should he disappear into the shadows, keeping Ghost safe but leaving the truth buried forever? What do you think he should do next? Drop your comments below and let us know. Does Elias go after the ones responsible? Does he try to find others like Ghost? Does he run, knowing they will never stop hunting them? Or does he risk everything to uncover the truth? The choice is yours. Elias doesn't know what comes next, but with your help, he'll be ready for it. If you love suspenseful, action-packed stories with twists that keep you on the edge of your seat, then don't miss out. Subscribe to the channel now and become part of our growing community of story lovers. Click the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Because trust us, things are only going to get more intense from here. Join us on this adventure and let's see where the story takes us next. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Elias and Ghost need you. Are you in?